Well, we'll go ahead and get started now. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We're very excited to have you here today to join us for this fabulous launch of this new, exciting collaboration and partnership between the David Geffen School of Medicine and the UCLA School of Education and Information Studies called the Academy for Excellence in Medical Education. I'm delighted to welcome you here today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Clarence Braddock, Professor of Medicine, and I'm the Executive Vice Dean and Vice Dean for Education in the David Geffen School of Medicine, and delighted to have you here today. I'm going to lead us off with a few remarks and then turn things over to my colleague and the co-director of our center, Professor Tina Christie, Wasserman Dean in the School of Education and Information Studies. First, it's an exciting day, and this collaboration represents the best of two amazing schools coming together to try to advance medical education. Certainly, we do a lot of medical education in the medical school, and we are committed to excellence. But this journey really started when I came to the David Geffen School of Medicine in 2013. And I began asking colleagues to talk to me about partnerships and collaborations with colleagues in the School of Education. And I heard that there were some, but I began to realize that there was great potential for collaboration. Right across campus, just a few steps away from the School of Medicine, are scholars, experts in all kinds of areas of education, pedagogy, evaluation and assessment, community engagement around education, and it seemed a vital partnership to try to cultivate. I'm very grateful to the prior dean, Dean Suarez Orozco, and particularly to Dean Tina Christie for being open to having conversations about this partnership. So we began talking about the kinds of things that were important to the School of Education and their leadership and faculty, and that were important to us. And we began to find lots of common ground in areas of the science of teaching and learning and the idea of promoting teaching excellence. Common ground in terms of advancing scholarship in education, understanding and contributing to the world of scholarship in that arena. Common ground about thinking about community. So there's a wonderful tradition in the School of Education on engaging in community, improving education for the city of Los Angeles and beyond. And we're trying in the School of Medicine to advance health in Los Angeles and beyond. And that partnership started to come together. We began to collaborate on very specific things like our medical education fellowship with faculty from the School of Education teaching our faculty the science of teaching and learning and methods of research in medical education. And then we began talking about how to solidify and really concretize this. And that was what led to the launch of the Academy for Excellence in Medical Education. The goals are very straightforward, but also very ambitious. We want to promote excellence in medical education by engaging scholars in both schools and sharing with our faculty, with our trainees, how to bring those principles and the best practices to every teaching encounter in every setting, whether it's in the classroom, the small group, the hospital wards or clinics, and in the community. We want to contribute to the growth of scholarship in this space through collaborative work at the level of faculty collaborations, at the level of graduate student training, in all really areas. We want to contribute to the community through engagement and promoting excellence in our community, both in terms of health, education, and the combination of those two things. So we're very excited to be here today. I'm going to give you a brief sort of overview of what we'll do today. You'll hear from my colleague, Dean Christie, and then we're delighted to have as our keynote speaker, a longtime colleague, friend, and mentor of mine, Dr. Kelly Skeff. He will give us some opening remarks about the big picture, how our work fits in more broadly to the field of education. We're delighted to also then have three stellar examples of the products of our work from the work of these past years, faculty who have completed our fellowship in medical education and or are doing important work to begin to give you a flavor of the kinds of things that we're wanting to sponsor and support in building a community of medical education scholars. Then we'll have an opportunity to sort of get some closing remarks and importantly, to give you a sense of what's beginning here. And it is a beginning. With the launch of this collaboration, this academy, we're creating a community of people who are interested in medical education, who are interested in advancing each of our own excellence in that space, who are interested in contributing to the excellence of others, who are interested in contributing to the science of teaching and learning, who are interested in making an impact in the community. So I couldn't be more excited to be here today for this launch. There'll be lots of activities that you'll hear about from this day forward, opportunities for you to get involved through formal ways like our medical education fellowship. We have plans for degree programs that will be coming in the next few years. We have opportunities to collaborate and really form community. So again, I couldn't be more excited, and I'm now delighted to introduce my co-director and colleague, Professor Tina Christie. Dean Christie is a professor of education, was a longtime chair of the Department of Education within the school, and headed the department's very well regarded social research methodology division. She's extraordinarily experienced and respected throughout the campus and beyond, and I couldn't think of a better partner in launching this effort today. Dean Christie.
Thank you, Dean Braddock. Thank you so much. And Clarence, I want to thank you for reaching out to us to partner with us, because it was your gesture, it was your phone call, it was your approach to us that really led to this partnership that we are so excited about. We're so delighted to join you in this particularly important endeavor, and we look forward to working with you. As you said, this is just the beginning. Esteemed faculty, students, and guests, in my remarks this afternoon, let me begin by providing the context for our partnership, at least from my perspective. Our work in education is premised on the firm belief that the quality of teaching directly impacts student learning and their future professional practice in their respective chosen fields. In the context of medical education, this means that we believe exemplary teaching by faculty in medical schools will lead to improved professional practice on the part of newly trained physicians, and thereby enhanced health and well-being for their patients. While teaching is often characterized as, quote unquote, having a knack for it, we know that there is an actual science and an art to it. Teaching needn't rely on instinct or inherited practices alone. Teaching can become supremely intentional, methodological, and intensely reflective. It can be transformed through thoughtful planning, by the latest discoveries in the learning sciences, and by proven pedagogies. We are convinced that this art and this science of teaching can be taught, but even more importantly, that it can be learned. Our decades of experience in education bears witness to this fact. There are principles underlying our partnership between the UCLA School of Education and Information Studies and the David Geffen School of Medicine. Through this collaboration, we seek to inspire innovative pedagogies and pioneering research in medical education. Upmost in our minds is that medical education can be particularly engaging. It can be dynamic, it can be vibrant and imaginative, breaking out of the molds and the fetters of those inherited practices. Together with the two schools, shared principles of social justice, we also believe that enlightened and inclusive medical education can help alleviate long-standing health disparities in the communities we serve, enabling greater access to quality care for those most in need. John Dewey, the celebrated American philosopher of education, famously said, quote, "Since growth is characteristic of life, education is all one with growing. It has no end beyond itself." Through an education in all things educational, we aspire towards this growth of our faculty, growth of our future physicians, and most importantly, through them, the growth and well-being of their patients. These are the ideals we envision for the UCLA Academy of Excellence in Medical Education, ideals that we hope all of you will join us in achieving. Thank you and welcome to our launch today. Back to you, Clarence.
Thanks so much, Dean Christie. Those are wonderful remarks. It's always a good bet to quote Dewey in a session on launching an academy for excellence. So again, we're very excited about today to go back to the question of what is the academy. It really is a collaboration that's based on several programs, specific things that are already launched, and we'll be very excited to share more over time about. One is our medical education fellowship, which I mentioned, and again, is a little tiny advertisement. The medical education fellowship is an opportunity for medical school faculty to basically join in a series of sessions over a course of a year. They're usually every other week. The first year fellowship is, we call it sort of an introduction to becoming a scholarly teacher. That is the notion that you bring the best evidence and theory of teaching and learning to everything you do in teaching. And importantly, the fellows in the first year program also have the opportunity to bring those lessons to an education innovation project. And later today, you'll hear a little bit about some of those projects. The second year fellowship is really research in medical education, and it's really there where we have research method seminars and a mentored research project that scholars begin in that year, really to kind of catapult them on to a career to go from being scholarly teachers to being teaching scholars. We have a wonderful program that we're doing in partnership with the School of Education, which builds off of their long-standing collaboration with the UCLA Lab School and LAUSD to bring an optimal wellness curriculum to K through 12 education. A really wonderful program that will bring the best of the faculty and folks in the School of Education Information Studies, along with the School of Medicine. And then finally, we'll be launching a series of convenings, community building for faculty who have finished the medical education fellowship or other kinds of similar training programs who wish to share their work with colleagues to advance that work. So that's just to give you a sampling of what's to come in the coming months. So please stay tuned. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Kelly Skeff. I could go on for a long time about Dr. Skeff because we've known each other a long time. I shan't, but I shall go on for at least a moment. Dr. Skeff is the George DeForest Barnett Professor in the Department of Medicine at Stanford University and the co-director of the Stanford Faculty Development Center for Medical Teachers. Dr. Skeff was one of my early mentors when I was just as I say, a wee lad trying to find my way into this field. But he, in his formative years, was one of the early pioneers of being a physician who actually went and got a PhD in education. He may tell you that story. But from that, he's revolutionized how we think about clinical teaching by bringing theory-based and empirical study to improving teaching excellence. He's been a great mentor to many individuals. I think the number of folks who have gone through this training program is probably in the thousands and literally is around the world. So I can't think of a better person to be here today to help us launch our new fabulous endeavor than Dr. Skeff.
Well, can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Clarence and Christina. This is a treat to be with you all today. It is truly my honor and pleasure because this is a very special occasion. I was thinking about it today and realizing and going back through to think that George Miller thought about something that might be akin to this in 1955 when he was at the University of Rochester, or University of Buffalo in New York. And he tried to bring the educators over to the medical school and it did not work. And so there's been an attempt. So you are now building on 65 years of attempts, successes, and failures. But I'm quite confident that this is not going to be one of the failures because of the commitment and the power and, well, the sense of respect that the two schools have for each other, which is exactly where this needs to start. Now I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just give me a moment here. Well, I have been thinking about this for a number of days and weeks, and then I thought, well, what are we having today? Well, today I'm inviting you to the celebration of a marriage. And it's a noble marriage, and if I would have my flugelhorn, I would be tooting out here really loudly because this one is something that should have been in Buckingham Palace because this is a marriage of nobility. One of the things that has struck me as I've had the opportunity to be inside the field of medicine and inside the field of education, as these are two fields where nobility cannot be questioned, two fields who are committing themselves to humanity, to the growth of each person, to the health of each person. And so it's bringing together two fields with a true purpose that makes us feel like this is going to work. And so that marriage is one that I feel really grateful to be a part of. Now, why are we doing this? Why did you all decide to do this? Well, it's pretty simple. It's because we care. We care. We care for patients. And we care for the carers of the patients. And those carers of the patients go all the way from the patient's family, immediate family, the patient's community, and every member of the healthcare system. And we haven't really spent enough time thinking about those carers, that we have to spend our time working with the faculty who are training the physicians for the future, working with those in the front line, working with those at the desk in the clinic, working with the social workers, working with every member of the healthcare team who has been caring, and in the last year and year and a half, that caring has been, well, it's been daunted because the pain and the power, but the community's recognition and respect for the carers has begun to be once more visualized. And so we care about these carers, and you're bringing two fields to help those carers be as effective as they can be. But we're challenged by these particular carers. And that's who, well, I would say are the gifted learners, the people like are on this audience. Those who enter medicine are gifted learners. There's no question about that. That's how they get there. But teaching a gifted learner is no small task. Gifted learners pose new challenges. But who are these people? Who are our gifted learners? Well, guess what? They're the cream of the crop. They've surfaced through elementary school, high school, colleges. They are learners who love science. They're humanists who want to help people. They're inventive people who want to help society. They are professionals who want to implement professional values. Now, these are the people with whom we get to work. Well, why do we have to spend time bringing the School of Education and the School of Medicine together? Because we're not doing a great job with this cream of the crop. We know that students can enter medical school with inquisitiveness, with great insight, and within a year or two of being exposed to us, we know we can see depression. We can see students who no longer want to care. We can see people who ask themselves, why is it that we join this field? So our gifted learners need help. And what I wanted to do is just take the framework for analyzing education that we've developed at Stanford and highlight as we go through there why it's so important that your schools come together to do research. Because we have not created a learning climate where learners want to be. If at their senior year of college, their senior year of medical school, I was visiting an institution where 20% of the seniors in medical school had said they wish they hadn't done it. Now, what are we creating in a climate that would have a fifth of the people not want to do it again? Or what are creating in a climate that a third of the faculty or a third of the practicing physicians, at least a third, are suffering burnout? So we need to study what is this climate that we're creating, and our session of control of our session. That is, how are we managing our time in education? Are we effective about it? And our communication of goals. Do the learners and the teachers know why we are here? As we've seen examples, unfortunately repeated examples of unprofessional behavior within our fields, we have to ask ourselves the question, were the goals of professional behavior explicitly and adequately emphasized in such a way that the methods that we use actually brought about a completion of those goals? And what methods did we use? Are our teaching techniques effective? Or do we find that some of our teaching techniques make students more afraid of being a participant in the educational experience than to be an active, excited member in the educational experience? And the concept of evaluation. Do we as teachers know where the learners are? And when somebody says to a medical student, I met with a group of 8 Stanford students, and I said, what would you do if you were on rounds and you thought a reasonable question to ask? Well, the sad point is 6 of 8 people said they would not ask it. For sure, they would be found out to not be as knowledgeable as they were expected to be. Now, how are we fostering that? How are we giving feedback? This very complex activity of how do we let our learners know what we think of their performance? The science of feedback been studied over and over, and we know how hard it is. And yet when we go to medical institution and we see the feedback that's being given to practicing physicians about their behaviors, we often see that the feedback ends up making people less enthusiastic about being in that field than the feedback does about making them more excited. And the promotion of self-directed learning. Are we taking advantage of all the drives and all the wonderful insights of these learners that we have? Well, I've known for myself as a teacher that it's not very hard for me to look through these 7 aspects, these 7 principles, these 7 categories, and see where improvement could happen. So I want to congratulate you because the work is yet to be done. We don't know how to do this yet. We will always be changing, and you will bring about the marriage and a celebration of this purpose and help us advance. So I'll stop at that point and wish you all the best and hope that I can collaborate with you at every step of the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Skeff. As always, your wisdom and your perspective really command our attention and reflection. I'll be reflecting a lot on your remarks in the coming weeks and months as we start this journey, this marriage as you put it. So, I mean, I think Dr. Skeff's comments are a wonderful start to the next part of our program, which is the opportunity to feature some of the work of some of our colleagues who have been on this journey with us for the last several years. It also will help give you a little bit of a flavor of the kinds of things that will be increasingly the fruits of this collaboration. So we have 3 presentations from 3 just phenomenal faculty educators, all of whom have distinguished themselves in both their innovative work and in their day-to-day interactions with colleagues and with our trainees. Our first speaker is Dr. Chantal Simmons. Dr. Simmons is a resident in urology. Her presentation is entitled Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the Urology Workforce, Strengthening the Pipeline. Now, Dr. Simmons is a urology resident, as I said, and she actually is in the midst of patient care. She was a medical education fellow with us last year and then returned to finish the rest of her training. So she sends her regrets, but has graciously recorded a video of her presentation, which we'll now show you.
Good afternoon, Dean Christie, Dean Braddock, and Dr. Skeff. My name is Effie Chantal Simons, and I am a proud former alumnus of the UCLA Medical Education Fellowship program. And it's such a distinct pleasure to be able to share some of the work that I did under the tutelage and guidance of the MEF program with the overarching title of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion in the Urology Workforce, Strengthening the Pipeline. I wish I could have been there in person with you today or virtually with you today. Unfortunately, clinical care calls, and so I'm not able to be there. However, I hope the work that I'm sharing with you today might be of interest. I want to begin with a quote. Data never speaks for themselves. It is the questions we pose and those we fail to ask, as well as our theories, concepts, and ideas that bring a narrative and meaning to marginal distributions, correlations, regression coefficients, and statistics of all kinds. I have no disclosures at this time. So with regards to the arc of this talk, I'm going to begin with some background information, next transition to historical trends and current states of racial representation in urology specifically, which, since in case I didn't mention, is my specialty, current specialty, medical student exposure to urology, and lastly, ending with the urology match. So racial disparities in urology. In 2020, at the beginning of my research year, at a time where there was such a heightened consciousness around racial equity, particularly in healthcare, I started to ask myself, where does racial disparities show itself? You know, the way I answered that question was, you know, within the urology workforce, in the way we deliver healthcare to patients, and also disparities with respect to urology patient outcomes. I chose to focus my energy on looking at the urology workforce. So looking at things like exposure and access to medicine. And this is for those who are in pursuit of the field as a career path, career development opportunities, as well as this concept of inclusion. Now, the term underrepresented in medicine is a term that was coined by the AAMC in about 2003, and this describes racial and ethnic populations with disproportionately low presence in health professions, and this is where it's key, in comparison to the general population. This typically refers to individuals who identify as Black, Latinx, American Indian, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander. There's several other subgroups that are encompassed in this definition, depending on where you are in the country. Now, the term underrepresented in medicine is sometimes conflated with underrepresented minorities, whereas underrepresented minorities speak to the idea of racial groups not represented in a region at large. Underrepresented in medicine, however, speaks to this idea of racial groups being present in a region but excluded from medicine. So we recognize that diversity may be displayed in various aspects of our identities. However, for the purposes of our research and for scope, we chose to focus on race ethnicity, and that is not to undermine all the other aspects of our identity that hold value. So for context, in 2019, whereas the US population comprised of 12.4% and 18.4% of Black and Latinx individuals respectively, in the world of urology, of all the practicing urologists in the United States, only 2% and 3.9% identified as Black and Latinx respectively. Looking at the trainee population for urology residents, 3.1% and 5.7% of urology residents identified as Black and Latinx. And when you consider populations such as the American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander populations, those populations were not even identified or reported. So that data was not disaggregated. Again, for historical context, in 1935 is when we had established the American Board of Urology. The very next year, we had our very first Black board certified urologist. It was a Black man, Dr. Richard Francis Jones. However, it took a good 51 years for us to have the first Black woman in urology. And I'm proud to say she is our very own Dr. Carol Bennett, a UCLA urology professor. Now, data matters. A problem that is not acknowledged is a problem that is destined to remain unsolved. In urology, we recognize that with respect to gender representation, because we happen to be in a field where only 9% of practicing urologists identify as women. And so we were very intentional about how we collect data with respect to those applying into the urology residency match. And we've not applied that same care and diligence to race ethnicity representation. Now, before I venture further, I wanted to spend some time on this concept of positionality. So historically, we've worked under the pretext that researchers are void of bias, they're observing phenomenon as neutral beings. And this speaks to this concept of objectivity. This view allows us to ignore our bias and our effect on study participants and on outcomes. So this speaks to the concept of individualism. Now, researchers are predictor variables. This is something that I learned in MEF as well. So I choose to name all the ways that my very being, my identity as a minority, as an immigrant, as a Black, as an African woman, with all its privileges and its disadvantages, its motivation, my motivations, my experiences, all the ways that this may influence the work that I do so I can account for them. And so others can hold me accountable in order not to interfere with the integrity of the work. I also want to put forth that people of color are not a monolith, and I do not know all things about the experiences of others. So I want to be mindful of my own projections onto or assumptions onto others. Now, with that in mind, with the support and mentorship of Dr. Braddock and the entirety of the MEF team, created a collection of research projects under the umbrella title Equity, Diversity, Inclusion in the Urology Workforce, Strengthening the Pipeline. Our overarching goal was to gain an understanding of the barriers to access into and advancement in medicine, and more specifically in urology, for individuals who identify as URIM, in order to create targeted interventions to address this underrepresentation. Now for AIM-1, while there is an expanding body of literature assessing gender diversity within the urology physician workforce, there's not been a formal analysis of longitudinal, racial, and ethnic diversity trends. So this current work examines historical trends as well as current state of racial and ethnic representation at every single stage of the educational pipeline for academic urologists. This allows us to identify current barriers to diversification at each stage and to establish grounds for improved urology-specific diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives going forward. So we expect that this data will serve as a benchmark for improvement initiatives. So as part of the study design, we performed a cross-sectional secondary data analysis with data obtained from various sources, including the US Census, the National Center for Education Statistics, the AAMC, and the American Urological Association. And then we performed comparative cohort analysis across time, as well as across cohorts to see if there were any differences across race ethnicity groups. And this again is a pictorial representation of the educational pipeline for academic urologists. We recognize that there are many sub-steps that are not represented in this picture, and this is because of this idea of scope. Now in this graph, what I want you to pay attention to is that this is a breakdown by race, ethnicity, and gender for individuals who are applying to medical school, who get accepted to medical school, who matriculate to medical school, and who graduate. Now, the pink lines represent our Black populations, orange represent white, blue represents Latinx, and brown represents Asian. Our dashed lines represent men, and solid lines represent women. So the most striking findings, to me at least, Black women, and that if you follow the green arrows, they will point you in the right direction. Now, Black women apply to and are accepted into medical school at about twice the rate as Black men. The other thing that I also note, there's also an appreciable decline in the representation of Black women when you transition from the applicant pool to the acceptee pool. So this is what we're seeing here. Now, this raises a couple of questions. Is there an issue with preparedness of Black women as they apply into medical school? Or is there a possibility for barriers to their entry into medical school? Now, with respect to both white men and white women, we noticed that there was a modest increase in representation from the applicant pool to the acceptee pool. However, when we turn our attention from the matriculant pool to graduate pool, although there's a modest increase for women, there's a much more substantial increase for white men. And the question that comes up for me is this: who are we losing before graduation, leading to an overrepresentation of white men in graduation? So that's food for thought. This data is represented in a slightly different way, where here we focus on acceptance rates, matriculation rates, and graduation rates across race ethnicity. And our color scheme will be constant throughout the course of the presentation. So pink is Black, is our Black cohort, orange is our white cohort, brown is Asian, and blue is the Latinx population. We've now added our American Indian colleagues in yellow and our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander in green. So we already start to see a spread in acceptance rates, and most strikingly with our Black peers, when their acceptance rates to medical school tends to be lower than their counterparts. Graduation rates, however, is staggering. So Native Hawaiians as well as American Indians have the lowest graduation rate, somewhere close to 50–60% rate. And then they're followed by the Black and Latinx students, and then our white and Asian students have the highest graduation rates. We further broke this down by gender, and we wanted to disaggregate to see if there are any cohorts that were disproportionately affected by this phenomenon. And again, we see here that our Black women have the lowest acceptance rates of all individuals. And when we consider graduation, our Native Hawaiian and our American Indian colleagues have much lower graduation rates compared to their peers. Now, the next thing that we examined, we looked at the top 20 medical schools with regards to the representation of the percentage of graduating medical students who identify as URIM. And we did include Puerto Rico since it's a US territory. And we asked ourselves the question, which of these institutions have urology representation in such a way that it would increase the likelihood of people being able to apply. So the first metric we looked at was presence of a urology residency program. Now, of the top 20 institutions in terms of highest URM representation in their graduating classes, only 10 of the 20, so 50%, had a urology residency program. For context, there are 145 urology residency programs in the country. There are 155 medical schools, US medical schools. So that kind of gives us puts things in perspective with regards to why 10 of the 20 institutions that have the highest URM representation have no urology residency presence. The other metric we looked at is the presence of urology interest group, which has been associated with a higher likelihood of applying to urology. 7 out of the 20 institutions had a urology interest group. So it's no wonder that our representation with regards to URM, specifically to Black and Latinx students, has remained flat and stagnant around the 2 to 5% range over time. And this is true for urology applicants, for urology residents, urology faculty. And the take home I want you to take from this slide is the idea that if we don't do anything differently, we're going to keep continuing with this trend. Now, we compare the practicing urologists to our peers in other surgical fields, and we're not doing any better or worse than our other surgical counterparts. There's definitely room for improvement across the spectrum of surgical specialties. So putting all of this together, what we find is that in 2019, there was a stepwise decrease in the proportion of Black and Latinx members who are represented at each stage of the educational pipeline. And this decrease is statistically significant every single step. It gives us the opportunity to think of interventions at every single step. So when you transition from the US population to medical school applicants, thinking of pre-health pipeline programs, pre-med preparatory pipeline programs might be of interest. And then, structured mentorship is of importance as people are applying to medical school. Then you think of programs, pre-med programs such as the Minority Association of Pre-Med Students, and the concept of holistic application review is of tantamount importance. Throughout the transition in the educational pipeline, structured mentorship and sponsorship remains a constant. Some of the other things that are of help, so these are for individuals who are in medical school, how do we successfully get them to graduation? Well, how are we supporting our student affiliate groups, and how can this translate into support towards graduating successfully? Now, specifically for urology, we think of the concept of early exposure. How is that being navigated, and what kinds of research opportunities are crafted for students in order for them to succeed? Going from the person who applied to successfully matching, we think about things like productive urology research that can be completed in a succinct amount of time, holistic application review processes, program director cultural competency training. How trained or comfortable are program directors in being able to support their trainees from different backgrounds, not just with their training, but support them through the journey of life as they go through the 5 or 6 years of rigorous training that is required. And then how do we get people to successfully complete residency? Again, structured mentorship, research support, social support, and access to career development. And then lastly, we think about the pool of individuals who end up in faculty positions. Are we recognizing, valuing, and rewarding mentorship as a means to promotion? So again, this idea of early career development and alternate promotion paths. Are we supporting diversity-focused work? Are we supporting the attendance to national professional societies that are crafted for individuals from underrepresented backgrounds? So those are questions that we asked ourselves. Now, when we submitted our work for publication, the educational pipeline has historically been thought to begin way before medical school's point. So it came as no surprise that after our initial submission, the editors had asked us to go back and acquire data for the high school population and the college population. So we've included that in this updated graph. Now, in summary or in conclusion, racial ethnic disparities exist in early exposure to urology, involvement in urology interest groups, and access to urology research. Though URM students are less likely to engage in research, of those who do, they have similar research productivity as compared to their non-URM peers. URM medical students regard having a race concordant mentor as extremely important, however, may not have access to those role models. Further evaluation of the urology match is required to ensure equity in our urology residency process. And the finding that Black students are more likely to have a family member or close friend with a urologic diagnosis, even after controlling for household income and total debt, underscores the need for a more diverse workforce to elevate the structural and cultural competence of the urology workforce as a whole. In terms of future directions, I'm very much involved in crafting best practices for recruitment and retention of URM in urology through our professional organizations, as well as through several publications that we've submitted, looking to be a model for other specialties, particularly surgical specialties. And then we're hoping to test, and this is where the real work begins, test data-driven targeted interventions with implementation science. So this concept of we're going to plan, we're going to do, we're going to study, we're going to act. And that's where the real work is, in my opinion. I have a phenomenal research team. I couldn't have done this work without my faculty advisor, my research mentor, and my sponsor, really, Dr. Seigel. The chair of my department, Dr. Litwin, has been a phenomenal source of support. And then Dr. Braddock has really been, a resource that I've always been able to turn to. And I've been blessed to have a multidisciplinary team of individuals, including people in education and psychiatry and the MEF team, as I had mentioned. And I've received funding and support from several different organizations. So I just want to leave you with this. This kind of work takes a village. It's not to the credit of one individual. And I'm truly grateful again for the opportunity to share a glimpse of what we've been up to. And I'm hoping to be able to share more in the future. Thanks for your kind attention.
Well, that was quite impressive. And hopefully you have a chance to hear more of Dr. Simon's work. I can tell you that, as you can tell, she's got I've told her a career's worth of projects teed up, and the energy and insight and brilliance to carry it off. So we wish she were here today, but I'm so glad she would made the video for us to be able to share her work as representative, again, of the work of our scholars who come through our medical education fellowship and who will be representative of the work that we hope to do in the future. I'm delighted next to, actually, surprise guest just joined. Dr. Simons, we just showed your video. I don't know if you'd like to just say a brief greeting, and perhaps we might even take a question or two from folks, but at least give you a chance to say hello.
Right. Hello, everyone. My apologies for not being able to attend or to present live, but really thank you so much for the opportunity to share the work that I was able to do with MEF. And I'm happy to answer questions if there's time. If not, I'm happy to answer questions via email as well.
If folks have any questions, I meant to mention this I will mention this for the other presentations. Our webinar has a Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We can take a question or two, but again, I want to just thank you for joining. Your presentation was awesome, and way above the Call of Duty to come. Looks like you just scrubbed out.
I sure did. I might have to go back in, but I figured I could join for a minute or two.
We understand. Great. So our next presenter, I'm delighted to introduce, is just getting a note from our IT folks. Dr. Cantor, we're getting your presentation teed up. Is it okay if we reverse the order? Okay, perfect. Okay, we're showing that we're nimble here. So our next presenter is actually going to be Dr. Antonio Pesiguero. Dr. Pesiguero is a very highly renowned clinician educator in the Department of Medicine, has very important roles in our medical education program with medical students, runs a fabulous program in the Department of Medicine for aspiring clinician educators. His project is entitled Preparing Residents for Future Careers in Medical Education with a Learner-Centered Multimodal Longitudinal Training Pathway. Delighted to introduce Dr. Pesiguero, who's also an MEF alum from 2016. Dr. Pesiguero.
Great, thank you, Dean Braddock, and thank you, Dean Christie. Let me share my screen here. Can folks see that?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, well, I'm excited to share my project that I started when I participated in the Medical Education Fellowship back in 2014. My project is essentially was the creation of a training pathway for residents who are interested in future careers in medical education as clinician educators. This pathway officially started back in 2016, and I've been lucky enough to work with an amazing team of medical educators that helped get this started and have helped keep it going for the past 5 years now. Doctors Rachel Brook and Dr. Emily Cantor, both past graduates from the Medical Education Fellowship, as well as Dr. Pamela Singh, who was one of our first graduates from our pilot year of the Medical Education Pathway back in 2017. And of course, our Vice Chair for Education for the Department of Medicine, Dr. Jody Friedman. So I'll go over a brief description of how we put this pathway together, how it's structured. I'll discuss some of our program evaluation data that we've been able to collect for the past 5 years, and then a brief discussion on what we've learned and where we're going for the future. So we first start off by identifying a need. There's obviously value in training residents to become effective teachers, not just for the learners that they engage with, but also for the residents themselves who are doing the teaching. There's data that supports when you train residents to teach, there can be better knowledge acquisition, better job satisfaction, a greater interest in teaching careers, and can help aid in transitioning to junior faculty positions. And a growing number of residents are interested in future careers in medical education to be more involved in medical education. And this role of a clinician educator has really emerged over the last several decades as a very kind of unique career pathway for them to consider. Now, over the last several decades as well, Residents as Teachers program has emerged as a means to improve resident teaching skills. But most curricula in this area are somewhat limited. They're often one and done type sessions at the beginning of their internship, maybe a refresher during residency. And so for residents who are interested in future careers as a clinician educator, there's a desire to seek additional training and practice opportunities in areas that are important for the clinician educator role in clinical teaching, especially in curriculum development, scholarship, as well as leadership. So we sought to find a solution to this by building a curriculum that was based on published literature of best practices in medical education for medical education and clinician educator training programs, that was built on the works of others, established residents, fellow, and faculty medical education and clinician educator training programs, including the Medical Education Fellowship, and also based on conceptual frameworks in education to help guide our work. In building our curriculum, we focused on 4 major domains of the clinician educator role, and we focused on resident level competencies within each of these domains. So one of the domains, clinical teaching, we borrowed a lot from Dr. Skeff's framework in terms of teaching our residents theory, teaching them how to assess and provide feedback to learners, how to create the appropriate learning environment, how to teach in small groups, large groups, things of that nature. Curriculum development is also a big component of our pathway. Residents learn how to identify needs in their local kind of teaching environment, learning environment. They learn how to develop a project, design a project, implement that project, and then evaluate and report their results to share with the community. We talk a lot about educational scholarship, research methodology, disseminating work, sharing it with others, and reporting it appropriately on one's CV. And then, of course, administration and leadership, how to lead a clinical team, how to lead a project team, how to negotiate change in your local learning environment. To make this happen, to hopefully accomplish some of these training objectives, we have 4 major curriculum components for our pathway. The first being a seminar series. Students meet once or twice a month in a seminar series. That's a blend of didactics as well as interactive small group activities to help the students, residents engage in the learning material. Opportunities to teach is always the fan favorite of the group of residents. They get opportunities to teach in all phases of the medical school curriculum, even new curriculum that's coming up. Residents are asked to complete an educational scholarship project, a research study, or a curriculum innovation project. And they also obtain mentorship. They get mentorship for their early career planning, fellowship applications potentially for some of them, for clinical teaching, as well as for their scholarly work. To help guide everything, we use conceptual frameworks to help guide when we're building our curriculum. Cole's experiential learning model, where we provide real experiences for residents to teach and conduct scholarly work. as well as space and opportunities to reflect on and transform those experiences into knowledge and skill sets that they can use. We're also, like Dean Braddock had mentioned as well earlier on, we're creating a community of practice here, and we're introducing them to a much larger network of like-minded educators. And this is kind of where everything kind of comes together. And this is really the backbone of the medical education pathway for the Department of Medicine here for our internal medicine residents. So the medical education pathway, like I mentioned, began in 2016. It's a 2-year longitudinal curriculum for our residents. It's open to our residents in our categorical program, our primary care program, as well as in medicine pediatrics combined training program. They start the program usually in their PGY2 year for categorical and primary care track residents, and then complete it at the end of their PGY3 year, so 2 years. Med Peds residents, they complete it during their PGY3 and PGY4 years. Like I mentioned, it's multimodal with the 4 major curricular components, including the seminar series, the teaching experiences, the scholarship project, and mentorship. It's learner centers where the learners can help identify whatever career goals they have or learning goals they have through the pathway, so we can help them achieve those goals with several checkpoints along the way for evaluation and feedback. Major learning objectives. The residents participate in the pathway. We hope that they will help, they'll be able to identify best practices in those 4 major domains that we identified important to the clinician educator role, and apply them to real world teaching experiences that we offer them. We also hope that they will be able to demonstrate scholarship and demonstrate leadership in designing, implementing, and evaluating educational research projects, research studies, and curriculum innovation projects. So we've collected some data over the past 5 years, and this is probably the slide that I'm most proud about. So since 2016, these past 5 years, we've graduated 72 residents from our program, from our pathway. 13 residents completed a 1-year pilot from 2016 to 2017, and 59 residents have completed the full 2-year curriculum as of the end of the 2021 academic year. And we currently have 37 residents in year 1 and year 2 of the pathway. These 72 residents have completed 50 educational scholarship projects, a wide range of projects, some research studies. We had a resident look at resident perception of duty hour changes during the last major resident duty hour change policy. We've had residents develop curriculum before upcoming oncology or ICU rotations. We've had residents develop curriculums around point of care ultrasound, EKG interpretation, mechanical ventilation management in the ICU. During the COVID-19 pandemic, some residents got creative. We had a resident develop a debriefing session on difficult COVID-19 cases in the hospital. We had a current ID fellow who helped develop a team-based remote learning curriculum for medical students who were displaced from their clinical clerkships early on during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we also had a pair of residents work on a telemedicine curriculum, teaching internal medicine residents kind of best practices in telemedicine, residents who had never done telemedicine before COVID-19, but were being asked to do it in their outpatient clinics last spring. We've also had residents do much larger projects. We had a past resident, current palliative care faculty member who did a 4th-year elective, or created a 4th-year elective for medical students here in the medical school in palliative care. We also had a resident just this past year create their own pathway in the Department of Medicine for residents focused on health equity and advocacy. And we have estimated that these 72 residents have contributed about 2,500 hours of teaching, the vast majority of this in the medical school, working with medical students from 1st all the way to 4th year. We assessed, we had 3 cohorts of groups of residents that we followed from their PGY2 year, the onset, to their graduation. We surveyed them at the beginning and at the end. We surveyed all our residents in our program, and we looked at the data from residents who did our pathway and those who did not. And looking at residents, we asked them to self-rate their confidence in key clinician educator competencies across those 4 major domains. And from what we can see here, I'm still working on statistical analysis, but we can see some pretty positive trends here where our residents have developed more confidence, increased confidence over time compared to residents who did not participate in the pathway in various areas: small group teaching, large group teaching, teaching in an inpatient environment, teaching at the bedside, assessing learners, providing feedback, developing learning activities, complete curriculums, conducting research, disseminating the results of that research, documenting the professional activities and achievements, leading a project team, managing difficult team dynamics, various competencies that we try to incorporate in our curriculum. We've also surveyed all our residents for the past 5 years on their general satisfaction with the curriculum. And the majority of our residents have found that the experience of the pathway has increased their interest in pursuing a clinician educator career, that they've learned something valuable, that they felt like the pathway was a good use of their time, that they've been able to apply or teach knowledge and skills that they've learned through the pathway to activities, roles, and to other people, and that they would recommend this pathway to other residents in the program. We've also had them rate our curriculum components on a scale of 1 to 5, and we average about a 4 for most of our curriculum activities. But really the standout is the opportunities the residents get to teach and work with our medical students at the Dave Geffen School of Medicine. We've also collected written feedback from our residents who participate in the pathway, and they've really highlighted the opportunity to not only provide enhanced training in various domains important to the clinician educator role, but also combine it with additional practice opportunities beyond the routine traditional opportunities that residents get to teach on the wards or in clinics. They really highlight the main strength of the curriculum being this opportunity to have additional training and additional practice opportunities in medical education. They've also highlighted the positive influence the pathway has had on their own teaching skills, as well as their ability to conduct research. And they've also commented on the positive impact of mentorship in the curriculum and how the pathway has really helped them kind of better envision what a future career as a clinician educator could look like for them. So what have we learned for the past over the past 5 years with this pathway? Well, I think this pathway really provides, again, residents an enhanced opportunity for training and practice in important skills in medical education. And when we see increased confidence among these residents and in areas that are really important to the clinician educator role. We also see that it promotes career development and really helps residents provide a new perspective on what a future career in medical education as a clinician educator could look like. And we also see benefits to the local medical education system, the number of hours that the residents have contributed to medical education here at the School of Medicine, and also helping identify and fill in gaps in the curriculum. And our priorities for the next few years. So we want to create physician leaders in medical education. It's important to develop everybody's, all our residents' competence in clinician educator domains, but I think we also need to create leaders within medical education. And so we're hoping to robust our leadership skill development curriculum within the seminar series. We've also been enhancing our mentorship structure. We realize that sometimes you need more than one mentor to help get the job done. And so we've created a new system over the past year where each of our residents have at least 2 to 3 mentors that help with career planning, with teaching, with educational scholarship projects. We're looking at creative ways to create structured opportunities for direct observation and feedback to really enhance that aspect of our curriculum. With this new cohort of educators for excellence that we have at the School of Medicine, we have created increased opportunities for the residents to get paired with some of these experienced faculty members for more longitudinal time with these folks so they can get some feedback and perspective on how they're doing across several teaching sessions. And we're coming up with, as soon as the COVID pandemic hopefully settles down, some creative OSCE type activities too to provide feedback. We're also hoping to evaluate the future impact of our pathway now that we're 5 years out and we have 72 graduates that have completed our program. We want to see what that delayed impact looks like. And so we're hoping to survey all our graduates in the next year or so and see how they're doing, what they're involved in, what their perspective on the pathway this far out has been, and really review the impact and longevity of the scholarly project that they worked on when they were part of this pathway. So I share a link here with additional resources, including our syllabus, some published work that we have, and a listing of all the projects that the residents have worked on over the past 5 years. And I thank you for the opportunity to share our work here, and I invite any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Antonio. That was fantastic. And I just have to comment on both the program itself, but also the impact, the really nice evaluation you put together. And I want to just emphasize the concept that you share, this notion of a community of practice, because that is very much what you've put together and established with your colleagues in the Department of Medicine, is the same kind of thing that we're hoping to do much more broadly. We'll invite a few questions here. I see one's in the chat. I'm going to take the prerogative to ask the first question while I'm scanning the questions in the Q&A. I wonder if you just might say a couple of words. You kind of hinted at this at the tail end, the impact on this program on the careers of the folks who have participated. And I just can't help but think it's opened up vistas for them in terms of thinking about what a wonderful career as a clinician educator or education scholar. But maybe say a few words about that, then we'll go to our questions.
Yeah, for sure. Even my personal experience, I joined the faculty back in 2010 as a clinician educator, but I realized I probably didn't know exactly what that meant and what the different kind of opportunities that I would be able to kind of engage in. Just being a clinician educator doesn't mean that you're always taking care of patients and teaching residents on the floor. It can mean a variety of different things. And so that was one of the things that I learned as I went through the medical education fellowship. And as I started to meet and network with more and more folks in the medical education community, that there is a wide variety of opportunities to really make a career for myself that aligns with what I'm interested in, with my work-life balance, and that I would be happy with and have some longevity with. And so that was something that I really wanted to instill in our pathway here, really showcasing that, if you have a strong interest in one particular area of medical education is very, very diverse. If you're really interested in doing some research studies, you can do that. If your really main interest is developing curriculum, you can focus on that. Even within curriculum development, focusing on just feedback or assessment tools, things like that, I think is important. If you're, really the mindset is to be a leader in medical education and be more of a manager and organizer, there's those opportunities as well. But if you really want to, teach also at the bedside and teach with a team environment in the hospital, all those are just very viable and diverse opportunities for you to kind of pursue. And so I wanted to showcase that kind of what it really means to be a clinician educator and what the diverse roles are, and those domains really help kind of frame that idea. And then also, through various speakers, through our seminar series, through their mentorship, through their interactions with faculty members when they're co-facilitating sessions in the medical school, they get to interact with a wide variety, a larger network of folks in medical education, and get a sense of what their stories are and how they've kind of carved out their careers to kind of see, is that something I would be interested in? And I didn't think I could actually do that.
Yeah.
So that was a big point of what I tried to get across.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I'm sure that your own role modeling has been a very powerful influence as well. We have a question from the audience, and then I might invite Dr. Skeff to comment after this question. So be thinking about that, Kelly. Look, this question comes from Dr. Lauren Nathan, who's a professor in OBGYN and the vice chair for education in that department. Dr. Nathan asks, what were the challenges you faced integrating this into a busy residency? Do the residents participating in this need coverage for their clinical responsibilities? And if so, how did you cover that?
Yeah, so our residents, this is a completely voluntary program, so none of them are required to enter this pathway or any of our other pathways that the Department of Medicine offers. So they come in voluntary, accepting, knowing that they're going to participate in this kind of enhanced curriculum over the course of 2 years. So our seminar series are all in the evening times, outside of clinical time usually. If residents are on ICU rotations, inpatient rotations, or post-call, any work hour restrictions, we obviously excuse them from the seminar series, but we have a large offering and we record many of the sessions. And so we find creative ways to kind of make those sessions available and accessible to the residents. Luckily, in terms of our clinical schedule, we have a lot of flexibility in terms of when they can actually do some of the teaching activities and some of the time devoted to scholarship. So the teaching activities we prioritize during their outpatient clinical time, when it's easier to excuse them from clinical service, from clinic, from a consult service. So those are easy to kind of excuse them. And our department has been very supportive. Our chair and our vice chair for education, Dr. Friedman, has been very supportive in providing that space and that opportunity to excuse them from clinical responsibilities when they're on their outpatient time. And then we also offer them research elective time that they can take to conduct their scholarly work.
Fantastic.
And so luckily, we've been able to accommodate them that way.
That's wonderful. And I want to thank Dr. Nathan for that question and also say, I think, there's probably more than probably some great opportunities for collaboration with other departments who are thinking about doing this. Dr. Skeff, as our invited guest and someone who's built a international career doing this kind of training, I wonder if you have any reflections you'd like to share.
Well, it's mostly a compliment that I would give you, Antonio, because of the breadth of the work that you've fostered over the last 5 years. I think one of the challenging things in educational research is to recognize when you're doing research and recognize what it is that you could study. And the idea of the fact that we're going through a process that takes students from a certain point to another point, and we get to examine both the process and the outcome, is an area that deserved a lot of work. In the past, we maybe didn't think as much about it as a research area. So I would just mostly congratulate you on recognizing that there are issues that worry you, that worry us about how our learners are doing, and that is fruit for research. I didn't recognize myself when I started that there were things I was very interested in, but I didn't put the word research on them until I went to the folks at the education school who showed me that this was substantive research about the way the human being evolves. And we have a field that's evolving. So I congratulate you mostly on the breadth, well, lots of things, but certainly on the breadth of the work that you're fostering. So that's just terrific.
Yeah, wonderfully said. One final question then for you, Antonio. What role do you think implementation scientists, not clinicians, not exactly educators, can have in adding value to the clinician scientist training, especially or clinician educator training, perhaps, given your lessons learned? So that's an interesting question, the role of implementation science. I don't know if that's something you guys have thought of or done, really worked with.
No, it's actually a new concept for me. But I think with this new partnership with the School of Education, I think we were looking for new creative ways to bring in other people. Right now, the majority of our instructors are within the health system and within the School of Medicine. And so, I'm excited as we look at the future, as we look at this partnership, to try to bring in other folks into the fold, to kind of think about what we're doing, how we can do things differently, and how we can, create this larger network with more input.
Absolutely, exactly the kind of thinking I think we hope that we'll have more in the future. So thank you so much for that presentation. Our third presentation is from Dr. Emily Cantor. Dr. Cantor is also faculty in medicine. Her project her presentation is entitled Antimicrobial Stewardship Lecture for Medical Students. Dr. Cantor is also, we're proud to have her as an alum of the Medical Education Fellowship from the class of 2019. Dr. Cantor.
Thank you so much. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Thank you, Dr. Braddock. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My talk today centers on the work that I did as a fellow, and it is focused on antimicrobial stewardship and a modified team-based learning curriculum that I developed. I just also fondly remember my time as a fellow. It was a wonderful experience. It was collaborative. I got wonderful feedback and mentorship. So again, very happy to be here today. Next slide, please. So my curricular project focused on antimicrobial stewardship, which is the effective and safe prescribing of antibiotics. It is an evolving practice that requires reintroduction at multiple high impact points in medical training and beyond. It's essentially a skill that needs to be developed and practiced over and over again, like many other things we learn as medical students and continue to grow in our careers. And so I got curious about two things. How do we get medical students prepared to participate in decision-making around antibiotics when they begin their clinical clerkships? And what tools do they need to learn as they go? And I found the following three approaches to be the most helpful. The first is timeouts, which is a structured framework that students can rely on time and time again, which is essentially a series of questions they can ask themselves and helps address a patient's unique antimicrobial regimen. The third was really introducing students to resources, including practice guidelines, how to find them, how to read them, how to interpret them, and local resources like a hospital's antibiogram, which can be very confusing as well. And then finally, I wanted to take something like bacteria and antibiotics, which is very memorization based, and turn it into a more active learning activity. And I did that by using the team-based learning approach, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. But it is essentially an active learning group activity centered on real life patient cases, group discussion, and it promotes exploration of these complex concepts. Next slide, please. Ultimately, my research question was whether a modified team-based learning curriculum was an effective tool to increase students' confidence in understanding, participating, and performing an antibiotic timeout. Next slide. The methods we used started with our team-based learning curriculum, which was integrated into the medicine clerkship orientation for our third-year medical students. Each of the students were given a pre-session handout, including stewardship principles and guidelines, as well as a readiness test with multiple choice questions. The in-person session was 1.5 hours. It was led both by an instructor and a facilitator and given to 25 to 30 third-year medical students during their required clerkship orientation. The instructor begins the session by reviewing the readiness test questions to reintroduce basic concepts. Then the students divide into small groups, about 4 to 5 students per group, to discuss 2 real-life clinical cases that I've experienced in practice. The instructor and facilitator are available during these small group sessions to assist with problem solving and answer questions. And then each case or timeout and learning points are discussed again as a larger group to highlight how different groups approach problem solving and provide real-time feedback. Thankfully, during the pandemic, we were able to shift to a Zoom version of the session, and it was successfully done with the use of breakout rooms. And so far, we've delivered the session over 30 times over the past few years. And we did collect survey data during our pilot year from 2017 to 2018. And then we also got instructor evaluations for each of the sessions. Next slide. So just to highlight a few things from our survey results, on the left side of the screen, we asked students whether or not the session improved their confidence in understanding the purpose of an antibiotic timeout. And you can see that in the higher confidence levels of our Likert scale from 1 to 5, and 5 is at the bottom, you can see that they increase their confidence in both understanding the purpose of an antibiotic timeout, as well as participating in completing the antibiotic timeout. And the right side of the screen is myself and my colleagues bragging a little bit that our session was generally the most favored session during the orientation, but really that students found the material to be high yield, that it was presented in an organized and clear manner, and that they were able to participate and ask questions. Next slide. Some of the comments that we got in the surveys are here. Some of them were constructive in terms of wanting a deeper dive, maybe providing less information, and when to deliver the information. Many of the comments were really helpful in terms of showing that the students got benefit from the sessions. This is the first time I understood antibiotics. It was interactive and engaging. It was very clear and organized. And so those are all of the things that we were going after with this session. Next slide. Finally, in discussion, we believe that the modified team-based learning approach was an effective teaching strategy in introducing and applying basic stewardship principles. Our survey data indicated that students found the session valuable in learning how to perform a timeout during this interactive session. This skill may translate to the early adoption of stewardship principles, self-guided learning, improved patient outcomes, and the lifelong practice of antimicrobial stewardship. Future study is needed to determine the long-term effects on antimicrobial use and the most optimal modality to teach this skill set. Next slide. I just want to thank everyone that helped support me while I was putting this curricular project together, both medical educators at UCLA, my colleagues in the Medical Education Fellowship Program, and at the VA. And a special thanks to my colleagues, Wendy Simon, Satya Patel, Pamela Singh, and Tyler Larson for making sure this lecture happened, rain or shine, Zoom or in person. It took a village to make sure that this went live every other month. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Braddock, for having me and for your mentorship over the years.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Cantor. A wonderful presentation. And one of the things that's really particularly gratifying with all these fantastic scholars that you've met today, including you, Dr. Cantor, is knowing, as we all do, the amount of work that goes into standing up the curriculum and doing the evaluation and assessment, and it's come together very nicely. We have time for a few questions. I'll start. One of the things I thought was always fascinating to me about this is the idea of the role of the medical student as change agent. By having providing them with curriculum, not just for knowledge, but to reposition themselves as a member of the team. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that concept and how you came to really see it that way, because it's a wonderful insight.
Yeah, I think part of my curiosity about this project was trying to understand why my students weren't getting more involved. When I first started looking into whether students were involved in prescribing antibiotics, I went and spoke with our informatics folks at the VA, and we tried to assess whether our students were actually putting in the orders for antibiotics. And the initial data that I got back was students are never putting in orders for antibiotics. And it concerned me because I didn't know if they were actually participating in the discussion, if they understood why we were making certain decisions. And so really this was born out of this idea of getting students more involved and participating in these important decisions that they're ultimately going to start making on their own independently. And another useful tool I like to implement when I'm teaching on wards is having the students write down questions that come up during rounds so that they can direct the learning themselves. And so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Just like I said, a wonderful insight and perspective on. I mean, I think we probably talked about this a while back when when we were first starting. I remember a project a few years back. One of a former fellow who was the project was it was actually a QI project to try to improve hand hygiene practices, the use of gel. And you know, as you all know that who are listening, it's been a challenging topic for many in healthcare. What they came up with was the simple phenomenon. Again, it was the use of medical students. So the practice was that they trained the medical students to be the first to go into the room on rounds, just to say, and to use the gel. And that simple act by the medical student role modeling for other members of the team saw a dramatic increase in use of gel. But again, hats off for that insight. Let's see if there are additional questions in the Q&A or from, yeah, Dr. Skeff.
Emily, thank you for that great work. One of the things that we worry about in professional training is that as you get better and better and better, the time for reflection becomes used less and less. And one of the nice things that I see that you've done with your timeout is you've mandated a time for reflection. And one of the questions is whether or not you think that is carried over, whether or not there's a pause in the midst of people working on actual patients as faculty, where they are in fact doing a psychological timeout to repeat the questions you've had the students repeat. So I don't know if, I don't know, it wasn't part of your study, but one of the things that I would encourage you to do is that in some cases, I think we can teach medical students to do things perfectly well. And then we throw them into an environment that makes those particular activities seem far less important than they were in the beginning. And then we use them less. And before we know it, this wonderful thing goes away. So I wonder if you have any comments on thoughts about residents and faculty and practicing physicians using the techniques you use with students.
Thank you for your question, Dr. Skeff. I think it's very important to, like you said, take a pause, especially when I notice that my students or my residents are getting overwhelmed. They start speeding through the information, and I actually have to stop them and say, hold on, let's take a step back and think about this from a different perspective. So I definitely implement that a lot in my live teaching when I'm on rounds. The reason why I chose timeouts is because it's actually a fairly commonly used approach within hospital stewardship programs. And so I was trying to mimic what students will actually experience on their clerkships. And like you said, I hope that we can take a second to think about our choices and decisions. I certainly will continue to implement that as a tool in my teaching. But also, I think it's something I should consider looking into in terms of a follow-up for this project. So I think that as well.
Very nice idea. We had one comment, more than a question, in the Q&A from Dr. Deb Lehman, a professor in pediatrics, and one of our assistant deans of student affairs, and also another phenomenal educator, who made a great suggestion about taking presentations like this and some of the work of our current and former scholars and making that part of a website, which will debut here in a moment. Thank you all, the three of you, for just fantastic presentations. I couldn't imagine better presentations to represent scholarly teaching and teaching scholarship, and the kind of notion that Dean Christie and I have in mind for the Academy for Excellence. I really want to give a special thanks to Dr. Skeff. Again, your friendship, mentorship, and collegiality is much appreciated, and your wisdom always welcome. I would also want to say that if you want to learn more about the Medical Education Fellowship, well, we have a website that you can look at and learn more about it, the Medical Education Fellowship, the other dimensions, and please become part of this community. I do also want to acknowledge and thank some very important colleagues, Aaron Powers and Arif Amlani from the School of Education and Information Studies. They spent many, many, many hours listening to me drone on about this idea. We're fabulous partners and have really enriched this and really played a huge part in making this happen. So hats off to them. Dr. Katie Namath, who's in my team in the medical school, joined this work about a year and a half ago and has brought phenomenal insights and wisdom to it as well. Our webpage, we'll put the link into the chat for you to please visit us. I do also want to thank one other person, that's Dana Schmitz. Dana has been the kind of the behind the scenes director producer for this event and is phenomenally talented and committed individual. So thank you, Dana, for keeping us on track and bringing this all together. It's really, really grateful for that. So with that, on behalf of Dean Christie and myself, this is just the beginning. We welcome you into this work. Please reach out to us. Please join our community, and stay tuned for more developments from the Academy for Excellence in Medical Education. Have a great evening.